Hello and welcome to the 333rd episode of the Crate and Crowbar, a podcast about PC gaming. It is Wednesday, the 22nd of July, 2020. I am Alex Wilshire, and tonight I am joined by Tom Senior.
Hello.
And Graham Smith.
Hello. I didn't realise we were half a Satan.
We are.
It's true, yes.
I know, that was amazing. I thought that's a good number. There's a lot of numbers. There's been a lot of pods.
There has been a lot of pods. Do you think there's been enough pods?
Never. The takes must flow.
And the news. We haven't got much to talk about this week, but I was really interested in a story I saw about someone who has created some sort of test platform which can take seeds for, say, the spire runs, and then it crunches through them to see whether they are impossible, as in, like, there is no way to win them. And his finding so far is he hasn't found any impossible seeds, which seems incredible to me. As someone who has serially is 100% failure rate in, say, the spire, despite tens of hours of playing, because I'm bad. I have always failed, and yet this is telling me that it's all my fault, which is a bit upsetting.
See, I find it so comforting that you just said you were bad at that game, because normally the only people I hear talk about it is like Tom F, who just seems to be like savant, like talking about things I've never encountered. I played that game for 30 hours. I also never beat the spire.
I've got better, as in, like, I went through a series of playing it before Monster Train came out, which then sort of took over my kind of fascination for it, for these kind of games, a couple of months ago or a month ago or so. I was getting better in that kind of chunk of playing, and I was getting to the end boss, but I was never seeing any way of getting through the end boss. Like, I was just like a brick wall. And then I'd go through like a succession of total failures that would sort of, I was sort of think, what? I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying losing, but surely there's no way to win this stupid game.
Have you beaten the spire, Tom?
Yeah, I've beaten it with every class, but then I bought it on Switch, and I've got to beat it on every class on Switch. Then I'll definitely buy it on iPad or something. You know, I'll just get endlessly keep rebuying that game and beating it over and over again. So good.
So, but apparently this project, which is was kicked off by someone called Forgotten Arbiter. It was kicked off by a discussion involving the silence inability to defeat elite enemy Lagavulin on Ascension 20 with a basic deck.
Blimey.
So Ascension 20 would be very difficult run. And Lagavulin is the first area's boss, or the first boss, isn't it, that the silent faces? That's right, isn't it?
Lagavulin sounds like a type of whiskey.
It is. I did Google it, and yes, it is. All the entries are for whiskey. So is that what do you know what the tricky thing is with that particular boss, Tom?
I can't remember it. What does it look like? They all look so strange.
It's the kind of it's the one that's asleep for a long time at the start. So, like, you have to wake it up, and then I think you got 3 turns where you get free damage on it, but it puts a block on, and then it goes crazy and then starts hitting quite heavily.
So is that the one where it's sort of, if you hit it enough in the short amount of time, it goes back to sleep, but sort of also grows thorns, so when you start attacking it again, it hurts you?
No, that's the spiky one. Oh, maybe you're right, actually. We should know this. But I'm not quite sure what the exact problem is, but that's what inspired this project, which I thought quite nice. And presumably it's answered the question. The silent definitely can beat that enemy with on Ascension 20, but and he has also tested out some of the more difficult seeds that he discovered, and but hardcore players, I'm always fascinated by the fact that these games are about constant choices, but there is just so many of them that you get this kind of incredible dynamic range between Graham and me, and the good people,
The Toms.
the Toms, all the Toms.
I don't
You've
think I could take Tom Francis.
You've spoken to the developers of Slay the Spire, Alex. Did you have any sense that they had a tool like that for testing their own game? Because it's not uncommon for game developers, especially if procedural games, to create a script that auto plays their own game to make sure that there are no dead ends or whatever else.
Yeah, that's a good question. I did. I have asked sort of similar ones. Like, there's this really bad question that you can ask game developers, which I am guilty of doing many, many times. Which is basically, cool. Your game is really complex. So how do you balance it? And you can just feel eyes kind of swiveling in their eye sockets, because like the answer is iteration. And I can't remember what their specific response was, but I'm pretty sure it was along the lines of, hey, we just do a lot of testing. We play the game a lot. And I think also it's been such an incremental kind of a game that I mean, it might be that they have a tool now, but I think when I talked to them a couple of years back, it was like, it was a case that sort of the game had so incrementally, they had such an awareness of how the game worked, and had it been played so much that they they didn't need such a tool. But I do wonder, like, surely there's just a thing that just generates spreadsheets, and you just choose the numbers for all the cards that sit in the spreadsheet with the least bad numbers.
I remember talking to Creative Assembly about testing faction balance in Total War games, and they basically built AIs that they just run all day, every day, that just churn out outcomes, and so they'll get like presented with the map and who's beaten who. And if you start seeing a consistent winner over that, it suggests they're a bit too powerful, perhaps. But they get loads of data out of that just by automating AI versus AI campaigns.
Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, it's rad.
There's I went to visit Hello Games a few months ago, and this is actually an old tool, but it's the first time I'd really seen it going. On the kind of like the in the office floor, there's a pillar, and on it is a TV, and on the TV the view is divided into a grid of, I don't know, 12 screens, all just like flying through No Man's Sky planets constantly, each of them on a different planet. And that is a tool which is testing for weird or messed up generation problems, and it's just constantly visiting, and it's also a stability checker, so that you just run it, and there's stats for how long this bot has been going for without stop, and one of them, sort of like 53 hours of constant traveling through the universe and kind of capturing video of its ventures through all these worlds that presumably no other people have actually visited.
Well, that's how Andy Kelly plays games. You could just hire him to be that role. Also, they should put something like that in an art museum. It would just be beautiful to watch all these planes on their own adventures going through space.
Yeah, no, it's good because you see the range of stuff that that it generates, sort of, because it's a very colourful game, and those 12, that grid of feeds from the game, they're all different colours, and it's like, yeah, it's really pretty. Is there any other news? What have you been writing about? Anything fun, Tom?
I've been writing about Total War Troy, which I played last week, which is of course set in ancient Greece during the events of the Iliad, and
during the events of the 2004 Brad Pitt movie.
With Legolas was there too. It's like a weird fever dream, that film. So they've taken an interesting approach to history, because like history at the time is reported through great grand poetry and great volumes of Homer's Iliad, of course, where it's like can't take anything of those things literally, as like you can't take the stories of mythical creatures literally. So what they've done is they've sort of like tried to map those mythical concepts onto human equivalents, like, oh, here's a type of unit that might have become known as the Minotaurs over the course of hundreds of thousands of years. And they're just like big buff dudes with hairy chests, which kind of undersells the mythology a little bit. But I think they're sort of like the Total War series is stuck in an interesting way, especially the historical games, because like since Total War Warhammer, which let them just make these crazy units of these like wild heroes, they've sort of tried to keep injecting some of that excitement into the historical games, but the sort of people who often play these historical games actually far more interested in accuracy or something that's actually quite believable.
Yeah.
So in Three Kingdoms, they had two different game modes, where one was this totally fantastic one where the heroes were almost immortal. They could take down entire units by themselves, and then they had like a separate mode which was like slightly more realistic. And that sounds like a lot of work to make two versions of the game for two imagined audiences.
That's okay. They get the right AI to do it for it.
Probably, yeah. But in this one, they've sort of like merged it and gone through an awkward middle path where like, I would have been fine for there to be Minotaurs on the battlefield. Like quite happy for that fantasy stuff to take the fore in the right mythological context. But I think they do have an audience they need to please with the historical games that I'm not sure this will really make anyone happy.
Because it's kind of set in fundamentally a fictional world, like we only know it through the story. So therefore, you'd think they could have quite a lot of latitude with just putting crazy monsters in it.
Yeah. So like take the Medusa. The Medusa is a type of agent you can recruit in Total War Saga Troy. And if you get her, you can send her on one mission. And she's just a woman with like dead snakes tied into her hair, like she's just a normal person. But she goes up into enemy garrisons and embeds herself in enemy armies and basically just scares the crap out of them until loads of them run away. And you basically like reduce the garrison just by sending her as a kind of like I don't know morale bomb goes off and takes them all out. And I don't know, that has so little to do with the Medusa as a myth that I don't find it very satisfying. Yeah, I wonder how it will be received as well. And also, like after how Three Kingdoms was so lavish and beautiful, and the way they kind of really kind of dug into the mythology of those heroes, this feels like a kind of less imaginative approach that I feel slightly more boring. But then I'm a particular type of Total War fan, and I imagine lots of people would disagree.
It's interesting because it's like Creative Assembly have always followed this kind of TikTok development rhythm with Total War games, where they do one which is massive and expansive and moves the series forward, and then they do one after it which is more constrained and smaller. They've always worked that way, but and sometimes like the more constrained focused ones were the better games because of that focus. So they would do the big expansive Empire Total War and it would be a fucking mess because it's so buggy and the AI wouldn't work in half a dozen different ways. And then they would do a much more focused thing that would be polished and would work really well. But now that they've rebranded those games as, because this isn't just a Total War game, it's a Total War Saga game.
Yeah.
Now it just feels like they've branded it in such a way that my brain instantly goes, oh, I can skip that one because it's that's just like the weird spin-off series. Like even like Shogun 2, which I liked, but everyone said the Fall of the Samurai expansion was better and more focused on like a single guy, and they rebranded that after the fact as a Total War Saga game. But still in my brain, I'm like, oh, it's one of the Saga ones. Those don't matter as much. Just ignore those. And the other weird thing with it is that they've signed an Epic exclusivity where I think it's going to be free for the first 24 hours.
Oh yeah.
Like you could just download a Total War game for free. That seems like an amazing thing. But like we did on the Rock Paper Shotgun YouTube channel, we did a video about a Total War Troy yesterday, and it's just got all of these comments on it from people saying that they think it's going to be shit because Creative Assembly don't need to make it good now because Epic have given them lots of money. Like they're just really cross. Not only that it's going to be exclusive to the Epic Game Store, but just the fact that it's being given away for free seems to annoy them.
That makes
that's incredible logic, isn't it?
The sort of logical backflips you have to do to sort of make that work is impressive. I think so. The Saga, I think you're right. The Saga does have like. As a label, I think is a little bit tainted because the last one was Britannia, which wasn't amazing. But Fall of the Samurai, which I reviewed, is bloody brilliant. It's really, really good, and I liked the Shogun 2 as well. So yeah, it feels weird to lump all those games together, especially when like Three Kingdoms was one of the most focused sort of what they were called tentpole Total War games they've done in years. Yeah, I know what you mean. Feels like a Champions League, doesn't it, compared to the Premiership?
Yeah,
which is harsh, but that's how it comes across.
Yeah.
What have you been playing lately, Graham?
I've been playing Death Stranding.
Me too.
Which I've played like 9 or 10 hours of it at this point, and I think it's amazing. Like, I'm just having a great time with it, and obviously it came out on console last year, and I played it a little bit then, but I remember all the discourse around it and the lead up to it being, oh, what is this game? What is this game?
Yeah.
And then I remember it coming out, and then I didn't see that much about it once it came out. Like, it seemed to fizzle out quite quickly. And I'm not sure if that's just my perception or if I just missed it, but I don't understand why there wasn't more celebration of the fact that someone has made a AAA game with that level of production values, but the core verbs of it aren't combat and killing people. It is, people flippantly describe it as a walking simulator, but it is a game about hiking, and like that's the main thing of it. That and the crazy ass cutscenes. So to set, I know you guys have both played it as well, so I won't monologue for too long. But to set it up, it's a Hideo Kojima game made by his new studio after he left. Is it Konami?
Konami,
yeah.
Which is set in a future America where there has been some sort of event to cause humanity to isolate themselves in independent cities under the ground, and you play Sam Porter Bridges, played by Norman Reedus from off of the telly, and you are a postman, and it is your job to walk between these different locations on the landscape, delivering packages for people. Your mum is the president of the United States, although the states are no longer united, and her assistant is called Die Hardman. Not Die Hardman, like a superhero, but just Die Hardman, like Hardman is his second name.
Also, he has an armored skull face.
Yes.
Electric robot skull face.
And your kind of like tech guy is called Heartman? No, Deadman. Is Guillermo del Toro's face, but not his voice, and not acted by Guillermo del Toro. It's just his face. And Heartman is it Nicholas Winding Refn, the film director? That's his face.
Oh my god, I didn't realize that. Okay.
And he's the guy that takes your pee and your poo and turns it into grenades.
Yeah.
Which I'm not gonna dwell on. And then also you've got a baby in a jar strapped to your chest, who is a breech baby born from a still mother, who is connected to the other side, and also when you die, you cause an enormous crater, but wake up in an ocean. Then, through some process involving your own esophagus, are reborn. And it's just like, I think I'll stop here, but that's the first thing that hooked me was, in most action-adventure games, like, say, any Ubisoft game, like any of the Assassin's Creeds, I am deathly bored for the first 2 or 3 hours. Like, where it's taking me through the tutorial of, here's how you stab a man, here's how you jump over a thing, here's how you jump off a thing. Oh, the simulation's ended, back to the shitty futuristic bit for some utter crap that I cannot stand. Like, compared to that, Death Stranding is so mad and has so many ideas that it delivers rapid fire at you for those first 2 hours, that I was just constantly entertained, even with the cutscenes that definitely go on too long and definitely over-explain things. It was just one idea after another, such that I was gripped the whole way through.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's there is so much more that while there's a lot more for it to explain, because it has a love of naming things, obscure things, so that you're going to have to learn what they are in order to know, oh, okay, that's that kind of thing, I know what that is. But then also it's very anxious to explain absolutely everything in the way that Ubisoft would probably be a little more light touch about, teaching sort of basic principles. This is a game that kind of bludgeons a lot of stuff. Bludgeons you with a lot of stuff. But yeah, like it's just so many things, concepts, explanations for things, things to do that it's a constant cavalcade of weird but interesting stuff. I think certainly the production value, carries a lot of it. The fact that every little interaction is accompanied by some kind of animation, whether it's a UI thing or an actual kind of game characters kind of doing stuff sort of animation. There's always something to look at and just enjoy for the pure fact that someone sweated quite hard over wondering, like, what would this look like, and how can it look actually pretty fucking cool. Because as a piece of production design, I'm just constantly just looking in the background at stuff that's being imagined for this. Straps. I love the straps. I love the frames. I love the windows. I love floor plates. I love all the buildings. Jesus Christ, the buildings! I was just thinking, like, while this is America. I mean, obviously, this is going over what Tom and Chris talked about way back when it came out on PS4. But this is America, except for it is modelled very closely on Iceland. So it's very, very bleak. Lots of rocks exposed, but certain sort of moss kind of growing in between, wild mountains and rushing streams and that kind of thing. And in this barren landscape are these concrete, angular, hyper-modernistic buildings, and they're really great architecture. Like, the angles are beautiful. Like, I was thinking about some of the architects that sort of brought to mind, but I was thinking of UN Studio, which is like a Dutch studio that make these sort of emblematic, very form-focused kind of buildings that sit in lots of tend to sit in lots of empty space, and that's like these things, these sort of sudden jutting things in this incredibly naturalistic environment. I love that. So, like, even when, like you, Graham, I was a bit bored during some of the descriptions and not really listening. I was always just looking. There was always something to get interested by.
I think you're right about, like, Ubisoft would be softer touch. Most other games would put a lot of that explanation off into a data log that you have to read, and the game has that. Death Stranding has that as well, but a lot more of it is in the cutscenes, and the faces are incredible as well. Like your mum is played by an actress called Lindsay Wagner, who I think is most famous for, like, the Bionic Woman or something like that. The 70s. Yeah. And then she was most famous then in the 70s, and she's an old woman now. She's the mum of Norman Reedus, but then it introduces your sister, and your sister's face is Lindsay Wagner from the 70s. Like, they have obviously got facial tech where they scan people's faces, but then they seem to have scanned this lady's face and either de-aged it or just scanned her face from 50 years ago somehow. And so it one-ups itself immediately like that. And yeah, like the product design of all the things that the main character Sam carries is really great. Like, I love your suit and the boxes on your back and all this sort of stuff. And like, the buildings are really important as well, because this is a game where you do spend a lot of time in the wilderness. Like, you spend, like, some of the hikes that I've gone on, even in these early stages of the game, took me like 90 minutes of, like, trying to plot a path through a landscape, because you can't easily just set up on the map, set up a path that like kind of leads you exactly where you need to go. There are maybe like 4 or 5 different routes, one of which is going to take you through mule territory, which are like other postmen have been driven and are now obsessed with delivering packages so much that they just beat up people with packages so they can steal them.
Right. Yeah, they've got some sort of compulsion, delivery compulsion.
Yes, just to get the dopamine hit of popping something through a letterbox. And then
but
you've
most
got
of what they tend to do, most of what they tend to do is just sort of set up a camp and wander around it.
Yeah. And then look, there'll be another route that will take you through BT territory, which is the kind of ghost oil whales. I don't know what they are yet. They seem to be invisible ghosts that can float in the air that look like scary soldiers when they materialize, but then the way they attack you is to shoot a beam of black oil at you that causes humanoid figures covered in oil to come out of the ground and grab at you, causing you to spill your packages. And then if you don't escape then a big, I think it's a whale, comes out of the ground.
It's got squid tentacles as well.
Oh yeah, so it's like a Cthulhu whale thing, I guess, that you then have to throw your piss grenades at in order to defeat, or you'll get killed and, cause the big crater. So like you're kind of making these decisions about where you're going to go. And then there's just the terrain itself. Like it actually, like most walking simulators, you just walk, like you just hold down W. Where here you're thinking about the balance of the packages on your back because you're constantly stumbling this way or that and having to use the triggers on the controller in order to shift your balance. You can move things around on your pack in order to shift your balance. Your shoes erode over time and all your items erode over time. And so and as you're going through across the terrain, you might come unexpectedly to a cliff and have no way down unless you've got a strand, which is what they call a rope. It's just a rope, but they call it a strand. And you can use that to like abseil down the cliff. But it means that the buildings, when you get to them, feel like a relief from being out in the elements. Because that's the other thing. Rain is called timefall and ages anything it touches, including damaging all your packages. Yeah. And it's sort of like it starts to feel like I used to go on a lot of hikes with my dad when I was a kid, up Scottish mountains and hills and stuff like that, which has like a lot of it is quite similar to Icelandic landscapes. It's, lots of rock, very windswept, lots of bracken, that sort of stuff. So like it's reminiscent of those things. And you do think about your footwear, you do think about what's in your pack, you do think about if when it's raining, about all the stuff that's maybe getting trashed because it's raining. So when you get to a building in Death Stranding, it's like, oh, thank God, like a chance to rest, a chance to repair my stuff. And you have like a private room in those locations that you can go into where Norman Reedus can have a shower, do a poo, garden in front of the mirror, point you quite aggressively towards his growing collection of army men figurines, which is always on the shelf by his bed. I don't fully understand.
I don't know how they're transporting between the places.
I can only assume that he must carry them in one of the boxes on his back or something like that.
Oh God, I really wish you wouldn't, because like I really hate it when I'm imbalanced and if it's all full of army figures, Warhammer figures.
Like, and it is a game of like entirely fetch quests, as far as I can tell. Like everything I've had so far is take this item from here to here, or sometimes go into mule territory and retrieve something they've stolen and then deliver it somewhere else. But it has enough going on in its simulation of weather and of terrain and of balance and of the erosion of your items that even traveling just from A to B is a real mission that you sort of have to plan for and think about a little bit.
I had a really nice, my favorite journey so far was up to a wind farm. It's a really close, it's not very far into the game at all. And by this point, it's taught you a lot of the main points of how to do stuff. I just built a bridge over the river outside the building where I started it, went across the bridge, and this journey was uphill. It's the first majorly uphill journey I've had so far. And then it went straight downhill and into a little forest, and then back uphill again. And that the first uphill ended up going into a strong headwind, and you could see the character like leaning into it. And I was constantly having to use the left trigger, to lean back into the wind in order to kind of counteract it. And that just added so much to it. This sort of this sort of, up until this point, I've been worried about stumbling on rocks, constantly scanning for things that I might stumble on. But now there's a whole other point. Like I was carrying a heavy stuff because the delivery was heavy. And then I got to the top, and then there's this hill down, this very steep, rocky between trees, and I was tired by this point. And like, really, it's just such a good journey, just so interesting, so grounded, sort of fully placed in somewhere. Where everything made sense, geographical, spatial, meaningful sense. Like, I'm still struggling a little bit with the ghosts. I don't want them. And I think that's the emotion I meant to have, obviously, but I don't want the distraction. I'm enjoying just walking. I don't want enemies at this, maybe I will later on, but I would love just have a few kind of, when it starts raining, which is when the ghosts come out, I just groan, oh, not this again.
The thing with the ghosts and with the mules is that, I've dropped the difficulty down to easy rather than normal. I think there's 5 difficulties, and I'm on the second easiest one, and it is easy. Like, even if you can't get away successfully from the ghosts, and you trigger the kind of boss fight, it's like 2 grenades in its mouth, and it's gone.
Oh, okay.
Like, that's almost easier than struggling with them trying to pull you off your feet and off your balance and that sort of stuff. Like, I'm almost at the point now where I just deliberately let it happen. So, because once you defeat the boss, that's it, they're gone completely.
Right.
And that area is therefore cleared from that point on. Maybe they come back hours later or something like that. But
that's really good to know.
Rather than making your way through across this landscape where they're constantly attacking you until you're out of the zone, you can just quite quickly lean into it, let them take you, and have the fight. But yeah, that's what I was going to say, actually. Like, I loved going up that hill as well, but there were enough considerations of navigating the terrain that I've sort of had instances where I've created my own little quests, because like at one point you get a bike which calls a reverse strike, because it's got 2 wheels at the front and 1 at the back, which is actually, it looks quite cool. It's quite a nice bit of product design again. But I picked a route through the terrain, was driving my bike up this hill and got to the top and was like, oh, this is a cliff edge. I can't actually take the bike any further. I could have gone back and driven back the way I came and tried to take another route, but that was going to take ages. And so I decided to park my bike there, abseil, and then go the rest of the distance across the valley on foot. But then, like 2 hours later, I was like, I want my bike back. I've got to now do a much longer delivery. I want to do it on the bike rather than doing it on foot. Yeah. And so I set off to go get my bike back at where I left it at the top of the hill. And that was a 90-minute long hike to get back to where that point was. At which point, when I got there, it had been, because the rain erodes everything.
Oh, so it's been eroded. Oh, God.
Yeah, so hadn't exploded. It was still there exactly where I left it, but it was all rusted and beaten to shit. And then I had to go drive it to somewhere else to repair it. And so, like, that was a really compelling mission I went on, but it grew entirely out of the systems of the hiking rather than it being just like a fetch quest assigned to me by one of the talking heads.
Yeah, definitely. Like, and then there's a whole sort of social side. I think, yeah, Tom, you're probably better versed in the kind of the greater machinations of the social stuff.
Yeah, so the game is about linking up these major population centres. You're using a special necklace, which is magic and it floats. But once a sector is drawn into the network, then you start seeing player-made structures there that seem to be like pulled from the entire pool of possible player creations. It doesn't pull all of them; it just pulls a select number of them. And so you might suddenly find a really convenient bridge, or a really well placed ladder, or just the perfect rope. When you discover these things, like you're genuinely grateful, because it just makes things so much less arduous. And there's a system called just the like system, where you could just smash a button on your control pad to just give that player who placed that item loads and loads of likes, which will then level their character up when they log in again. And that just becomes a sort of meta game across the course of the entire game by itself. And actually, I was incentivized to actually go back and build roads and build bridges and build kind of like recharge stations that can give your bike its energy back. Just because I kept on getting, I'd log in and it'd be like, oh, you had 2,000 likes. And it's just a transparent sort of like attempt to parody Amazon, as the whole fetch quest thing is as well. And the fact that you're kind of like a very put upon delivery person who's been given an impossible job, and when you get like slightly further into the game, you can pile up boxes on your back that are literally like 6 feet tall above you, that are just wobbling and swaying this way and the other in the wind, and it just becomes like a ludicrous task. She's like, why did you trust this one man to do all this work? And yet you end up feeling quite sorry for Norman readers. That contributes to the sense that when you do find one of these little man-made shortcuts, there's the gratitude. I think I found that because the buildings that you place have the same beautiful angular design as all of the kind of urban aesthetic in the rest of the game, but I found it like slightly spoil the landscape as well. And I'm not sure if this is deliberate or not. But when you kind of first go through an area and it's just there's not been tampered with at all, there's nothing there. Like it's just absolutely beautiful, and it looks gorgeous on PC, and it runs really well as well. And like that natural beauty does over time get scarred by the player placements, but at the same time you just need them. So I don't know if that's like a deliberate statement of some kind, or just the way that
feels
I
like it's
read it.
Yeah, it feels like it's sort of part of the messaging, and I don't know. I mean, the messaging. I mean, it's very Kojima, sort of cusp of profound. Like there's lots of stuff going on, and there's lots of stuff to think about, and you're never quite sure how much of it's intentional and how much of it is deeply profound, how much of it is dumb. It exists, in all of that stuff all the time, at the same time. But like, yeah, like, sort of like unpacking that in this instance, about these buildings kind of messing up the environment, like these beautiful landscapes. Yes, I can see it making a statement about, hey, everybody, like, we're like ruining like the world, but then, in doing the things that we do to do things, but then also like, it's really good that we're all connected. And that's a big message of the game. And like, we've got to join together and be connected. And so the only way to do that is to mess up the world. And like, I just have no idea where it's standing on any of this
stuff. What's that really saying about anything? Yeah. It's really struck me actually, because Emma's been playing it recently and she's really enjoying it, just for the hiking primarily, which is the best bit. But it's a profoundly lonely game in a way that I actually really enjoyed. And the only human contact you really ever have, they're mostly like either a hologram who has appeared in your apartment, or they're a kind of like hazy sort of 3D piece of graphics that you'll encounter, because everyone lives underground and you hardly ever see any real people in it. And there's only sort of mote of humanity in this whole world, really. The landscape's quite cold and unforgiving, and then the architecture's cold and unforgiving, and it's just there's a sort of like, you feel deeply kind of exposed as Sam, and it made me like Sam a lot actually, because he sort of gruffly gets on with it all the time, and like he'll moan if he falls over, he'll sort of moan and pick himself back up again, and that you feel his Norman Reedus' determination. But the overall sort of feeling of the game is that I didn't feel like I was connecting humanity up. Felt like I was just going through this kind of nightmarish hike with this poor man who doesn't even know why he's doing what he's doing. There's still an effective emotional weight to it.
No, definitely. Yeah, and it's really interested in showing you his body as well. Like, it's not like it is definitely funny that you can make him have a shit and you have to give him showers, but I definitely want to give him showers, because whenever I deal with the ghosts and get covered in their ghost oil, he gets really dirty, and I don't, his shoulders are just covered in these welts from the straps on these heavy on the heavy backpack that you're making wear, and you feel the hot water on coursing down his actually rather attractive body. It's like, it's just, it's that profound and sort of silliness, like next to each other all the time, and meaninglessness and meaningfulness. It's a really great game. It's exactly what you said it was way back when, Tom.
Yeah, it's easy to make fun of the plot and stuff, and it does frustrate me because it presents this barrage of incredible imagery, just brilliant horror concepts, and then just doesn't land any of it. just lets it hang out there for you, and it's like, well, it's a Rorschach test for you now. Make of it what you will. And I also find that a bit unsatisfying. But you're right, it's absolutely packed full of ideas, and it's a beautiful adventure, really, and there's nothing else like it.
I do wonder how much Sam is meant to be a stand-in for like Kojima himself. Like there is I don't know, like Kojima came to develop in Brighton a couple of years ago, and while he was here, like spent a lot of time in the record shops, and I know that because he has an Instagram account and he was posting photos of the records that he'd bought excitedly in the Brighton record shops. And Kojima's big on Twitter, and he has kids, and so there's something about this guy walking around this landscape, staying in these lonely private rooms that are almost like hotels, collecting because you find pop songs as you travel around the landscape that you can then make come out of the buildings that you place, and with this baby strapped to your front, and the cufflinks around your wrist, which is literally handcuffs that tie you to the network that connect you to everyone else, although you're so isolated from them. There's something of that kind of like international business traveler to Sam of that. I wonder if Kojima feels, or that he's expressing the sadness and loneliness of being a video game producer.
And he's constantly stressing out his baby. Maybe the baby is the gamers. Maybe that's stressing out all the gamers with his need to create.
I did come to like the baby actually, because the baby can like your actions, like the likes that you get from other people liking your structures. Occasionally, BB the baby will just like something you're doing, and that actually creates a whole personality for this fetus. So if you pull certain faces in the mirror, BB likes that. If you slide really fast down a hill, he likes that. But also, he doesn't like being submerged in water. So there's a kind of personality that comes out around that baby that structures your chest, in addition to the sort of weird flashbacks you get when you actually plug him into yourself.
Mads Mikkelsen turns up. Yeah.
Good old Mads, yeah. He's really good in that game, actually.
So you cry every time you plug the baby into yourself. Sam is Sam's a weird character because he's sort of presented as he's very stoic and unemotional in almost all circumstances, and he doesn't like being touched by other people.
That's right.
And then he experiences emotion only when he plugs the baby into him and immediately starts crying. Like, it's almost the cliche dad game discourse that happened around God of War. There is an element of that to this, I think, as well, of like stoic, gruff man who only has feelings after he has children.
I'm looking forward to meeting stoic Gruffman later in the game.
He even cries in a manly way, though. His expression doesn't change at all, and he doesn't blink. There's just tears that just start like oozing down his cheeks as he doesn't react.
But yeah, I really love it. I know, look, I've played like 10 hours so far, like I said, and maybe it all goes to shit, but I'm going to stick with it, I think.
Yeah, me too.
I enjoyed it at the end, to be honest. Even as the nonsense really kicked in.
Awesome.
Are you playing any games with stoic Gruffman in them, Tom?
Well, it's weird to talk about Ghosts of Tsushima after talking about Death Stranding. This is actually a PS4 game. It's pretty much the last gasp of the console generation, really. And it's also an open world game set in Japan. The Mongols are invading, and you're a stoic samurai man who's going to save the world, or at least Tsushima. And like, I'm really enjoying it, and it's really smooth to play. The controls just feel lovely, and it's got great animations for the fights and stuff. But it's kind of encapsulates the way that most typical open world design has gone over the course of this generation, and how like the expectations for an open world game with a big budget mean that you just have to have certain mechanics in. And there's, apart from perhaps Legends of Zelda, and apart from Death Stranding, very few games have actually deviated at all from the formula that pretty much Ubisoft have come up with. And that's kind of even though I enjoy the game, it's a source of disappointment for me, because it's something I'd like to see experimented more in the next generation, with the next generation of hardware coming in, where hopefully it'll be easier to like stream in these worlds via the sort of SSDs we'll be running these games on, and to get away from the kind of capture a point to reveal chunk of map, and just like skill points that unlock moves that you should already have at the start of the game as a samurai. Like the ability to kick someone is a sort of unlockable skill. It's like, well, I'm pretty sure a samurai would know how to kick someone. And it just endless collectibles, particularly of plants and bushes. So I know it's kind of like a sort of snackable thing, and it sort of lets you kind of swipe at a bush to pick it up as you're sort of traveling between two.
Is it one of the ones where you get to continue moving as you
yes, thank God, yeah. That's a lesson that I think a lot of games like Horizon Zero Dawn have learned. It's like, don't stop the player if they need to pick up a plant. Yes, it makes it's kind of a weird piece of design, because it makes a sort of crunching sound as if you've eaten it. It goes when you pick up a flower, but there's something very satisfying about that, even though it's stupid. I just think that it's just, I'm kind of sick of the same skill trees and the same combat systems and the same like absolutely gorgeous landscapes, but that are basically revolve around nodes of interest that you have to discover, and then you do some quite repetitive mission design over and over again. And it really does feel like that's Ubisoft's legacy in terms of open world game design, that has sort of been picked up by studios that just want to sort of make their version of that game.
It's also been thoroughly criticised as well. For a very long time, the Ubisoft open world design has been widely castigated, and it's something that even Ubisoft is kind of moving away from to a degree. Like reducing the amount of towers you're going up, like putting in Far Cry 5, making you climb a tower to be told at the top that you won't have to climb any more towers.
Why did you make me do the first one?
Yeah, I know.
You know this is bad.
Thinking, you bastard.
But I think it's gorgeous though, and I just love the world, and the badass samurai clothes you get to wear, and the awesome swords you get to upgrade.
I saw a slightly chilling thing that Tom Francis wrote on a thing that we all contribute to. He said that you have to unlock stealth. So not only can you not kick until you're taught it,
you can't crouch in long grass either. That's a high level skill. No, the stealth stuff is story locked, which is another thing that really irritates me when very just obvious abilities is locked to a story beat. It's not too far in, so you're soon able to just sort of crouch in long grass and assassinate people. And it's actually like, I really like the stealth in it, because it's really light touch and the controls are really good. They just feel really smooth, and the game's really good at interpreting what you want to do at a good distance. By which I mean, one of the great frustrations for me about so many games are just like third person, you're crouching behind a person, very slowly gaining on them as you crouch walking behind them, and then you misjudge the execution cue because you needed to be slightly closer to them than you thought you did, and then you turn into a big fight. Whereas like the more generously a game interprets that button press, the more I like it, because you know what I'm trying to do here. It's not a mystery. The outcome should be guaranteed, and I feel like Tsushima has lots of kind of light touch control stuff that actually works quite well for that. But yeah, I think it's the easiest thing for a critic to say is to like, oh, I played this loads before, so I want it to be different. But when it comes to open world stuff, I really do. I think Death Stranding really shows the value, the kind of emotional weight you could bring to an open world without that typical structure. And actually, the reason why Death Stranding to me felt like a real journey was because it lacked a lot of the checkpointy stuff. Like, you are moving between checkpoints, of course, but the
checkpoints are meaningful to you beyond simply being like an arbitrary checkpoint that the game has decided.
You're not sort of ticking it off. I actually want to get to that place to see the terrain in Death Stranding. I actually want to see more of America, such as it is that they've imagined it. Whereas it feels like for a game like Tsushima, you're playing in this beautiful backdrop. It's absolutely gorgeous, but the terrain feels like kind of meaningless. Really, it's just like set dressing in a way that Death Stranding, like the journey is really meaningful. I've really felt the difference between watching Emma play Death Stranding and actually playing Tsushima as well. So like I'd say like it's a perfectly good 7 out of 10 open world game with a nice combat system, and if you like samurai stuff, then it's worth getting. But I'm looking forward to more innovative open world structures.
Yeah, I think Breath of the Wild had that same journey feel to it as well.
Definitely.
You know, where the world existed outside of your journey through it, which I think definitely feels that's the Ubi thing. Like it feels like it's a world that has been entirely designed to ensure that you have a snackable piece of content. You know, every 4.8 seconds. You know, that you might be walking in any given direction. And the Tsushima, like this one has restrained itself from the Ubi design in the sense that it doesn't have icons all over the place. Is that right?
Well, it does on the map, basically. So
okay.
So it doesn't sort of have. It sometimes does actually have like floating icons when you're near an objective, but it has really elegant kind of ways of guiding you through the world without using HUD as that display. So if once you set an objective, you sort of like swipe upwards on the touch sensitive pad on the PS4, and a magical gust of wind and a kind of like a flurry of blossom gusts towards the objective that you're trying to reach, and that's absolutely lovely. Like I love that every single time I do it. Plumes of steam or smoke on the horizon are just big kind of like go here markers, where if it's like big black smoke, you'll know it's probably an enemy base. If it's white, it might be like a peaceful shrine you could pray at, or something else. And if you see a yellow bird, always follow it, because it will lead you to a treat. Magic yellow birds, they fly around you, and then you sort of chase them up to like shrines. Foxes as well, follow foxes. So it's got like these really nice thematic in-world ways of guiding you between objectives, but the fundamental structure of it is still very much clear this encampment, or now you've revealed the map around it. And that's still a little bit, it feels a bit old-fashioned to me, even though it's like these games haven't been around for a huge amount of time.
I hope we do start seeing games inspired by Breath of the Wild. Like, that's felt like such a breath of fresh air, even though it had towers in it and stuff like that, in a way, like its own version of them. That I hope, stuff like Ghosts of Tsushima would have been started, pre-production at the very least would have been finished, I would have thought, by the time Breath of the Wild came out. And so hopefully in like 2 years' time, we start to see games which are following in the wake of Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, and you mentioned that kind of, or maybe the next generation with kind of better streaming and that kind of thing. Breath of the Wild works on a Nintendo Wii U, so it's not a streaming issue.
Good point.
It's definitely all design.
So I mean, we kind of credit Ubisoft with creating this stuff, but like if you look at Far Cry 2, for example, which was the progenitor for a lot of that kind of design. Like Far Cry 2 is a much more interesting journey across that world, between the malaria that causes you to collapse every 6 minutes, to your guns that break all the time, the fire that spreads dynamically across it, the constant respawning of guards that make any journey you want to go on quite difficult. Like your truck breaking down because you're off-roading it, and the engine pops and you have to stop in the middle of nowhere and try and fix it. Like, it had all these systems at play that made the place feel alive and not like something just designed purely to be consumed by the player.
That's really interesting. Like, did Far Cry 2 kind of predate the great flare-up of popularity of the survival genre, where punishing mechanics have like become integral to games like DayZ and things like that, and become a sensation?
Definitely. It was way before it. Yeah.
Right, so it feels like Far Cry is actually experimenting with these deliberately punishing mechanics before it has become mega popular.
Yeah.
And I remember people like that. Those were people's biggest complaints about Far Cry 2, was that it was mean to you all the time. And you couldn't just go walk to the place because, as Graham says, like you were always getting accosted by bandits, or your shit just keeps breaking.
Yeah, and I think it's it seems like it's the systemic stuff which, the things we've been praising Death Stranding for has been the systems. The fact that it has a weather system and that it has this finely designed walking simulation going on, like, you know, and the fact that it can play around with this stuff and create these emergent situations out of terrain and weather and character appearing, and you know, um, Breath of the Wild is famously systemic, you know, that it's physics system and all that kind of thing. It feels like Tsushima, like, I mean, you know, maybe you'd be better placed to answer it really, but it sounds like Tsushima doesn't really have systems outside of the combat system, which is this self-contained, very discrete. Now you're in combat mode and you're going to be having a fight in this preordained situation where we can design it so that it creates the optimal situation for our focus tests audiences, and we leave a minimum amount to chance.
Yeah.
Is that like the kind of how things work in this?
So nothing unexpected will ever happen in that game.
Yeah.
There'll be no kind of confluence of different systems that create a magical moment, or even just like a slapstick moment of you know, what the hell just happened. It's just you're right, everything's parceled out into its section. Like, yeah, here's the combat bit, and here's you can try to do stealth if you want to, and there's a feature I really like where you could basically break stealth to challenge the entire camp by yourself, which is a nod to like Yojimbo and Kurosawa films, where there's a kind of like a quick draw mini game where you could just instantly kill 3 of them and look like a badass, and then throw bombs at them very, very cheaply as you run away, which is how I've done many of the outposts in that game. But yeah, that's just about like as much fun as I've had with it, really, in terms of like creating ridiculous situations, which I enjoy most about open worlds. And yeah, that's what I mean when I said it was smooth, because like, while it won't surprise me, there's no jank to it. Like, everything is like perfectly modeled just to work, and the animations just, they never mess up, and just the feeling of like running fast and climbing on your horse quickly and summoning your horse from nowhere all just feels lovely. Sucker Punch has done a really good job of just getting the game feel nice for that. But yes, I think like, especially like part of PC game or RPS, we've always loved sandboxes, and sandboxes requires things to go wrong sometimes. Like, I'd kind of sooner play Mountain Blade and just have very strange things happen with like alliances and armies clashing.
I remembered I went to a preview of Far Cry 2 in Montreal way back, I don't know, 2007 or something. And in one of my first and of the thousands of eye rolls from developers I've had since, because I was really interested in, you know, like, this was an early-ish open world game, and it fascinated me to think that there were these outposts of enemy soldiers like doing their thing, and you could see them from quite a long way off through your binoculars, or not monocular, I think it was. You patrolling and whatever. And I asked Clint Hawking, so like, will they just follow you around? Like, if you alert them, will they just come after you and just hunt you down? Like, you know, how persistent are these things? And like, I got this real sense, like, of course they're not. I can't tell you. I can't say, no, they're not persistent at all. Right. They just spawn and they just disappear, and like, you know, there's nothing magical about them at all. But at the same time, it is ridiculous for you to think that they have this kind of existence
in life.
But like, that is definitely what I want, and I totally appreciate that is an incredibly difficult thing to make in a game. This you know, this kind of persistent, open environment where anything could fucking happen.
I think
but
it's
like, God, that's the dream, isn't it?
I don't think it would have been like a crazy question at the time, though, because like Far Cry 2 came out 2008, but the year before.
When was Stalker? Was that 2006?
Well, that's what I was about to say. Stalker was 2007. It was the year before,
right.
And they'd been talking about that for like 5 years at that point, and its big selling point was, I think they called it A-Life. Which was its AI for the other stalkers in the zone and all the creatures in the zone, and the whole thing was, oh, you could come over a hill, and some stalkers could be in the midst of a battle with a bunch of mutants, whatever, or raiding a camp or something like that, fighting between these different factions, and all that stuff would continue to be simulated even when you weren't around to see it, so that you could stumble across it. And like, to a certain extent, that turned out to be nonsense or just not possible within the technical limitations they had at that time. But it did do more of that stuff, I feel like, than Far Cry 2 did. Like, it was simulating a certain amount of these creatures as an ecosystem that existed separately from you, with some sense of an economy of like items flowing between these camps and stuff like that. So like, it's not, I don't think it was unreasonable to ask Clint Hawking if his game did anything like that.
Yeah, but I can also see that sort of like I can understand, given the amount of criticism that that Stalker got for its sheer bugginess and the fact that the jank made lots of game-stopping, immersion sort of tearing out moments that kind of persisted, like which still exist as part of that game's legend now. I can totally see why Ubisoft of 2007, as it was basically making up all the rules that have defined the open world game ever since, would be going, nah, not doing any of that.
I mean, it's a miracle they released a game where you do have malaria and you have to take pills all the time. Like, the amount of stuff that is in that game that is completely unlike anything that they did afterwards is remarkable anyway.
It's also so disconnected from the first game, like tonally and everything. Like the first game was just a kind of knockabout. Again, it was notable for its open zones and stuff, but that was a kind of, sort of dumb action movie, wasn't it? And then you suddenly in this gritty situation where everyone's dying and like gang warfare on the streets.
I've read a bunch of making of stuff for Far Cry 2, and it started with the landscape. Like, they were trying to find what is a beautiful kind of exotic landscape that we could visit, that would live up to the first game, but which is different. And they settled on the idea of, I don't know where in Africa it's set, but somewhere on the African continent. And then every point after that seemed to be like, oh no, we can't make a frivolous game set in this place about the subject matter.
Yeah, right.
And the rest of the time trying to like earn the fact that they were setting a game there by trying to seriously convey issues around that part of the world. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure that was a wise move commercially, but it's a heck of an interesting thing.
That's amazing, yeah.
Shall we do questions from questions?
Yeah, let's do that.
Sure.
I got a question here from Sebastian. Sebastian says, I hate looting in RPGs. The infinite mountains of crap. I find that I never longer enjoy the fun that it's supposed to create of selling and crafting, which are actively harmful to the fantasy I'm trying to live out in most RPGs. That of the killer, the romancer, the moral dilemma solver. It sounds like being a killer or romancer is kind of creating moral dilemmas. By the way, this is an interjection by me, Alex. But it sounds like these are mutually exclusive things to be. Anyway, Geralt of Rivia doesn't haggle for meteorite or runestones in the books, so why am I doing it in the game? I see lots of mods that remove item weight, which leans into the gaminess and means at least you're not bogged down by deciding exactly which crap to carry. Myself, I prefer the opposite solution, where I only pick up something if I start using it right away and drop whatever it's replacing on the ground. So I loved The Long Dark, and I'm repelled by Diablo 3. What do you think? Are there games that you found especially egregious or praiseworthy in their loot-o-narrative assonance? That's very good.
Oh,
very clever.
We probably that's a whole bottle of whiskey each in the drinking game, I think.
Well, I mean, we've already talked about my answer, which is Death Stranding, which is, it's a game about packages, and you find those packages sometimes by looting camps or looting other people. But the thing I like about it is that the things that you're carrying have meaning within the systems of the game. They're not just an item on your inventory thing with a binary encumbered number that you can't go over like you get in, say, the Elder Scrolls games. You actually have to think about your pack and how you balance it on your shoulders and that sort of stuff. And that's the sort of thing I'm always looking for from looting and inventory systems. Things that, the items aren't just stats. They have some greater meaning within the world. And I wanted to point people at an article actually that I think is relevant to this that we ran, and I guess it's terrible to promote my website basically, but on Rock Paper Shotgun back in 2014. And a writer called Rob Sherman, who's an interactive fiction author, wrote an article called "I Am Over Encumbered: Why Game Inventories Matter," which is 7,000 words long. Back when we used to publish more experimental stuff, and it's kind of intercut with stories of his own hiking expeditions and the stuff that he would carry and the relevance of that. But it's beautifully written prose, and he just makes a very strong case for why loot and inventories in video games are rubbish and how they could be much better. And specifically, he calls out a novel called The Things They Carried, written by Tim O'Brien, who himself was a Vietnam veteran, and the novel focuses on a combat troop during the war and afterwards, but it tells the story via the items they carried. Like weaponry is mentioned, and that sort of stuff, but also just the kind of miscellaneous things that soldiers carry, when they miss home, when they miss people from home, when they're superstitious, when they're afraid, and the great significance that those items can take on. And I'm always sad that in games, you go on these great adventures, you stuff your boots with every item you find in bins and drawers across the entire landscape, and it's just mostly meaningless most of the time.
We'll stick that article in the show notes. But I think I missed this, so I'm going to read that with delight after this. I think I'm going to push back gently on being repelled by Diablo 3's loot. I mean, it's definitely critiquable, the fact that you're picking up just billions and billions of weapons that are meant to be used. They're all usable and yet worthless because they're not got the numbers that you want, and the same for Destiny and things like that. I think there's a difference in the idea of the narratively kind of the narrative work that loot is doing and the mechanical work that are kind of like a loot shooter or an action RPG kind of, how they work with loot. Like they're very different things. And I think it's definitely odd that I'm picking up hundreds and hundreds of items of armor in Destiny and trashing them magically and getting kind of small amounts of money for it, out in the field. But it's different, and it's very important to the game's economy that it exists. There's this stuff that I'm churning through and making rolls on to see whether I can get improved stats on things.
I think like loot games like Diablo, loot systems do kind of activate a part of the lizard brain that likes collecting things.
Yeah.
Irrespective of whether it makes any sense that you'd be able to hold that amount of stuff on your person. But also I think the reason I find over encumbrance mechanics annoying is because they are as simple as you have to walk at 1 mile an hour now instead of running at 8 miles an hour. And at least Death Stranding turns that into a game, because actually balancing and moving through the environment is deeply affected by how you actually pack the stuff onto your back and onto your size and onto the frame that you're wearing. But that speed reduction is just so annoying. I think if over encompass was more interesting, then there's some risk reward to it. Perhaps I'd be more interested. But I just find it to be an irritation in most RPGs. If I could throw fire out my hands, I could probably carry more than 3 swords.
I thought of another example of a game that does this really well, actually, is Neo Scavenger. Did either of you play that?
Yeah, that's a good shout.
Neo Scavenger is a roguelike with permadeath that takes place in a kind of post-apocalyptic world, but the world isn't wholly procedurally generated. It's like a roguelike set upon a kind of Fallout-like RPG, where you're making your way across the landscape. And there are cities and there are quests and there are factions that you then stumble across, and then you die and it's right back to the beginning. But it really works. And the starting point of that game is you kind of wake up from cryogenic freeze, and the only thing you're wearing is like a medical gown. and that's it. And there is a wolfman clawing at the door outside the room you've just woken up in, and you are just like you choose skills at the start, but you're just a pretty regular person, and the only things you can carry at the beginning are literally what you can carry in your hands, because you don't have any pockets on your medical gown and you don't have a bag or anything like that. And so like you can climb out the window to escape the wolfman at the door and go explore this world. And like the most exciting thing you find at first is a plastic bag, because a plastic bag you can put other things in it. And so suddenly when you find a bottle of water or something like that, you can put it in your plastic bag. If you find some tin of beans, you can put it in your plastic bag. And that's great, because that food's going to see you through the night. Although you're probably going to die hypothermia in the back of some car because you're still just wearing a medical gown. But then you'll be walking down a road and your plastic bag will rip, spilling your cans and your water bottle and all the other junk you've collected all over the roadside. And then you're just like, oh, fuck. Like, I might literally die in the next 24 hours because I can't carry anything, and you have to choose which 2 items you're going to take with you from what you've just spilled all over the ground. And, like, so if you manage to find a rucksack, then it's like Christmas morning. Like, it's the greatest thing in the world. Like, you've just become king of the universe, because now you can carry things on your back, and it's more sturdy. It's not going to rip like a plastic bag does. So it's a game where everything becomes really valuable. And the reason I mentioned the Wolfman is because you can choose like a fighting skill at the start. What you can do with that is, rather than climbing out of the window to escape, you can take a bit of the broken glass from the window, open the door on the Wolfman, and just fuck him up with a bit of broken glass. Like beat him to death with your bare hands, and then use the broken glass to skin him and wear his fur as a coat, which is going to keep you warm if you manage to win that fight. But you also, like the text, the flavor text that comes up says that you defeat him with such an amazing display of fighting prowess that you then go into another room in the facility, find the security camera footage of your fight, and take the VHS tape of it so that you have like footage of your victory. And so like you could then go out into the wilderness from the beginning of the game wearing this Wolfman's fur coat, holding a VHS tape. And yeah, this is a game where items really matter.
I remember being really screwed in that game because I could only find 2 left shoes, and you can choose to wear a left shoe on your right foot. It's just going to slowly fuck you up for the next few days, and that'd be like a major dilemma in the game. It's really, really clever.
Yeah, everything in that game is going to slowly fuck you up. Like, yeah, you can wear that shoe on the wrong foot, but you're going to get blisters, they're going to get infected, and you're going to die. And the bottle of water you found anyway, if you can't boil it, you're going to drink it, and you're going to get infected, and you're going to die. You're going to go into the forest, and you're going to eat some mushrooms, but you're going to eat the wrong mushrooms. You're going to vomit yourself to death in the middle of the night. Like, just everything in that game is going to kill you.
It's a fun time.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you, Sebastian, for that question. Travsis says, I bought Satisfactory after Alex's recommendation, and I'm really enjoying it. It's a fine game, very post-Subnautica, but I kind of feel like I'm playing it left-handed. The belts are finicky, building stuff neatly is tricky, reorganizing things is arduous. In short, the incredible UI with blueprints, drones, undo, redo, etc. of Factorio had preemptively tainted Satisfactory for me. My question: what game do you think you'd have enjoyed more had you not played a different game before it? I think that, I have wondered how much I'd like Satisfactory if I'd properly got into Factorio beforehand. But there's something like when I have tried to play Factorio, there's a clinic, like a non-embodied aspect to it, which makes it much more of a cognitive, much more of a isolated sort of experience, and which I kind of felt a bit cold and just couldn't get into. Although I appreciate there's almost, like everyone says it's an amazing game there. Satisfactory also has factories, but it's from first person, and I can totally, things are a trickier thing to do in this game. But because it's physicalized in front of me, I just found, despite some of the finickiness of placing stuff and the way things link to each other, the fact that I'm in that world that finickiness makes sense, and I kind of just accept it's part of the game. But I totally see what Travis says, because I have wondered whether Factorio would ruin it.
I don't have a fantastically interesting answer to this question, but I do wonder a lot of the times with, say, a game like Mirror's Edge Catalyst, which is the sequel to Mirror's Edge, and it was decent enough, I think, but I didn't like it nearly as much as the first game. Like, it's set in a kind of more open environment with a similar art style, and it's, you know, clean lines and pretty colors, and it's got all the free running movements as the first game did. But it just felt really flat to me compared to the original. Like, I just don't feel like it did any one of those things as well as the first one did. But if it had done those things first, without me having played the first game, like, the novelty of it would have been so much more impressive than it was. Because the novelty wasn't there, because I'd already played the first one, you know, free running mechanics didn't do anything for me as just exciting in their own right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think having an open world as opposed to like curated levels really did something to that game. Because the part of the first game is that it's kind of like sections of that game are just like a roller coaster. Basically, you're sort of sliding down things and jumping over things, and you're sort of going, as I've always said about this game, you sort of parkour running through the color wheel, and you'll suddenly like come out of a green bit out the sewers into this beautiful sunlight bit, and that's sort of like very curated for you. I think that journey was really lacking in the second one. This idea of kind of like just free running organically around an open city that mostly looks kind of the same. I think something just really went out the magic of the game just based on that one decision.
Yeah, it's weird because I so often prefer open world games, but I think you're absolutely right that it was the wrong choice for that game.
And our final question for this episode is from Chris from New Zealand. He writes, your mention of Half-Life Alyx Final Hours, which we talked about last week, had me again thinking about Valve's unreleased f-stop game. It was first publicly mentioned in Portal 2, The Final Hours, and it was hoped to be the big, unexpected idea that Valve needed for a sequel to Portal. Eventually, they scrapped f-stop mechanic when they realized that they were making a Portal game without portals, but kept details of the mechanic secret so that it could potentially be implemented in a future Valve product. I've often wondered about f-stop ever since reading about it in 2011, trying to imagine what the mysterious mechanic was, or wondering if f-stop had already been incorporated into another Valve product. I tried a quick Google search for the term, and it turns out the gameplay footage was revealed for the first time late last year. A company called Lunchhouse Software supposedly has the source code for the demo and has Valve's permission to release a video series to document the game. No idea how this happened to occur, but I'm just happy that my mind can finally rest. What are your thoughts on the demo? Is there a good game here to be made? Perhaps with Valve's renewed interest in game development, we may still see it in a future product. Warm regards, Chris. We'll stick a link to the video in the show notes. But essentially, f-stop is one of them games where you have a camera and you can take pictures of stuff in the environment, and then you can kind of create those things elsewhere in the environment using perspective tricks to make them larger and softer and larger and softer, larger and smaller, in order to make puzzles. And there's like one of the examples is a bunch of crates, because you've got to have crates. Taking pictures of all these crates, and there are some balloons on some of them, and you know the player creates a range of sized crates going from small to large, soft to large, and then attaches balloons which are also in the scene to one of the boxes, one of the crates, and it floats up into the sky. So yes, exposure. I was underwhelmed thoroughly by exposure. And Valve were completely right not to release it. That's my thoughts.
I think it's just it reminds me so much of Gary's mod, but if you like, I'm not interested in a puzzle game based on this. I'm interested in the sandbox that Gary's mod is, that lets me actually just plant balloons anywhere and put big boxes in and
right,
put a head crab on somewhere.
Physics sandboxes.
Yeah. Right, and that, like obviously Gary's mod has just been such an amazing kind of canvas for people over the years. Whereas, the idea of a kind of very limited equivalent of that type of like item placement tech doesn't fill me with joy.
But I appreciate this is from when this was, like, because I remember when, this is, around 2011, presumably this was being made in, 2009, 10, something like that. Back, I remember being very excited by games that allow you to spawn things into the world, to have this sort of element of creativity within a game world. That was sort of this amazing new thing that games could do. Like, I was amazed by Little Big Planet, which, physics-based world in which you could just place stuff down and it kind of acted physically, accurately, and behaved in the ways you'd expect, and you could make game, situations out of them. And that was thoroughly exciting. And I think that I would have a very different attitude towards exposure now. Now I can see huge limitations in a game like that. Like for this one, fundamentally the camera is acting like an inventory, which we just talked about. Like you're taking a picture of something, which is like putting it in your pocket and then you take it back out again. And just to explain, when you take a picture of something in this game, it disappears. The thing that you took disappears, and you take a picture of not the scene but the object that you're pointing at, like as it's sort of on its own as this singular entity. So it's very abstracted. There have been, I did see a video that did the social media rounds a month ago or so about taking pictures where oh god, I can't remember exactly how it worked, but like it was much more organic. You're sort of taking slices out of stuff almost by taking pictures out of them, and then you were able to, I can't remember exactly what was going on in it. Do you remember it?
I saw the same video. I think you could take photos of almost like an entire room and then put the whole room into a different area, and it wasn't just the objects within that room, but it would sort of deform the walls so that you could create new architecture in order to, it wasn't non-Euclidean, but you were kind of like creating these kind of Escher-like spaces almost in order to give yourself paths. But
that's the one.
But I find almost all first-person puzzle games quite boring now. Like, and I loved Portal, and I liked Antechamber, which was around about that same time. Right. But there's so many of them. Like Superliminal was one that came out last year. It was originally called Museum of Simulation Technology, and it's very similar in that you are doing perspective tricks in order to change the size of objects in order to solve puzzles. But always the puzzles just break down to trying to get from point A to point B, just trying to get to an exit door.
And then, get the thing from here to there.
Yeah, and I play a lot of Alan Hazelden or Sarkobun games, 2D games that have that similar idea to them. And I find those really compelling, like the puzzles of them tickle my brain and really challenge me, but converted to a 3D space where there's, I think partly it's because it's not on a grid. I feel like the kind of like physicsy wibbliness of the edges of those kinds of puzzles dilutes their potential a lot of the time.
There's a looseness that means it's less sort of positive. You just don't know, is this a solution?
Yeah, it's partly that, and then partly I think they can't have quite the same logical difficulty that maybe you could do from a top-down 2D thing.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely find just the first personness introduces an element of dealing with spatial stuff that I kind of like. I played Manifold Garden and love the way it looks, and I think the puzzle design is actually really good in it. But I've constantly am distracted by the fact that I'm feeling anxious because I think I might be lost and I don't know how to get back to where I was, and that detracts from the purity of the puzzle making.
I do feel like Portal and Portal 2 are both incredible games, and I do feel like Valve trapped a generation of indie game developers in chasing this impossible dream of making something Portal-like, because I don't feel like there's as much potential in that genre as Valve suggested. Like, I think they did it. They did that then. Don't try and follow in their footsteps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I prefer first-person puzzle games that almost follow Myst instead, where they're kind of adventure games, like stuff like Tacoma, which isn't really a puzzle game per se, but it is a kind of interactive drama that you experience as though it was kind of Portal-like puzzle game, forward-winding these performances through these different kind of space capsules. It's really nice. The Talos Principle as well.
You're right.
That's another good example where actually, to be honest, it could be a 2D game. It could just be a series of static screens where you solve the puzzles. But there's something to discovering the kind of the lore of the game and the kind of updating your data pad with philosophical discussions about the nature of sentience. But yes, I do broadly agree with Graham, definitely.
I think the telling one for me is The Witness, which like kind of like it's a stern puzzle game, and the puzzles have nothing to do with, well, no, they suppose they do have to do with first person, but in the best ways. The actual puzzle, the pure puzzle game itself is resolutely kind of board based. Abstract, mega abstract things. But then, like the first person stuff that it mixes into these puzzles is where like a lot of the magic lies, and uses the very best of first person. So actually, I would add probably The Witness to the Portal list.
The parts where you're kind of like tracing the environment or sort of creating patterns that invert the environment in front of you are actually really, really awesome. I wish there was more of that in the game.
Yeah, I agree. The Witness, that stuff kind of justifies that being a first-person game for me. But like, as well as the anxiety that you talk about of being lost, I also feel loneliness a lot of the time in these games, and The Witness especially made me feel that way in a way that I just wouldn't if it was a 2D game. Like, if I'm not embodied or personified in the space, I don't feel lonely. But as soon as it's a first-person thing, but there's no other people around, then I have a weird quiet to them that I find I can only take so much of, particularly if you're getting stuck on a puzzle. I will eventually just close it down in order to go find something noisy to do.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I think there's something to say also about the kind of like the place that puzzle games sit in my kind of life and world. Like, a lot of them are in a little window, on my desktop. While I'm doing something else, I might sort of, let's have a little go on that, or they're on my phone and quick to bring up. Let's do a level and sort of sweat over it for a while and then put it down. They're not. I don't have the need for them to be immersive, to take all of my attention. Well, they do take all of my attention, but not all of my kind of sense of place and being.
I
Yeah, definitely.
wonder how many of these games could be solved by giving you a little pet fox. I imagine The Witness with a little pet fox following you around.
I would say that's like a pet fox sounds great. I think actually, like, I talk about loneliness. I think a lot of these games try and solve that feeling of loneliness by doing the Portal thing of having a wacky robot sidekick that's constantly chirping and bantering away next to you, and I hate that even more. So yeah, if it was just a fox but he didn't talk or anything, if he didn't have like a gruff New York accent like that fucking dog out of Skyrim, then yeah, that would be good.
Well, that was all the questions that we have time for, and that means it is also the end of the show, the program, the pod, the thing that we've been doing. You can hang out with us and our community on our Discord channel, and if you have a question for a future episode, you can send it to questions@crateandcrowbar.com. crateandcrowbar.com, of course, is our website, and it's also where you'll find a link to our Discord channel. Or you can tweet questions or anything else to us at Crate and Crowbar. You can also listen to this pod, perhaps you already are, and all of our other pods on YouTube, as well as other places where pods are usually distributed. We are at youtube.com, Crate and Crowbar over there. Crate and Crowbar is kindly funded by our Patreon backers. If you'd like to know more about supporting our podcast and its spin-offs, visit patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. it only remains for me to say I've been Alex Wiltshire, and I can be found on Twitter at Rotational Graham.
I have been Graham. I shall continue to be Graham, and you can find me on Twitter at Gonnas, Gonnas.
And I'm Tom Senior, and I'm bad at Twitter, so I won't give away my name.
Thanks for listening.
everybody.
Bye.